Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we're going to talk all about why you're progressing slower than your mate. This is a topic that's come up with friends and clients recently when they're asking why so and so is doing better or so and so is making progress faster than me and why you haven't caught them up. So we're going to run through all the different factors that play into your current level of fitness or ability, and also the factors that play into the rate of progression that you're currently experiencing. So hopefully it gives you some useful takeaways to bring into your training and life and perspective. But before we get into it, as always, a big thank you to our show sponsors, thetrainingstimulus.com. Please check it out if you'd like to learn more about movement mechanics. wit-fitness.com. Please use our discount code LL15 to get 15% off your purchase. And Hydro, use discount code LL20 to get 20% off your blood flow restriction apparel. Right, Rob, where did this one come from, mate?
This come from a bit of a thought where I started to think back to my training career essentially, and how it started to how it's going now, and what expectations that I have to achieve at my powerlifting competition and so forth, and what I want out of it. And when I started to really break it down, I started to realize that when I started out in the gym, very much like bodybuilding in the gym, the only real comparison was, okay, I'm lifting more than I did last time, which is great. And then I might look across at someone else benching more, or oh, that's cool. I'd like to be able to do that. And that was it. Then you go into a group coaching thing where you start to see 10 to 15 other people. And there might be 3 people similar to you. So maybe starting at the same sort of time than you. And they're like, fuck, why is that person snatching more than me already? Or why can they do a clean? Why can't I do a clean? And then it goes on to the thing of social media, where you then start seeing the pool of even more people. So it's not 20 people now in your class. It's now hundreds of thousands and millions of people. And you're like, fuck, why is this 15-year-old squatting what I only just squatting? And you're like, it's funny because it's the comparison is what really starts to get to you. And it's like how, for me, when I looked back at my recently, I've got some lifetime PBs on my squat, bench, and deadlift. And if I was to compare myself to others here, I'd be really disheartened because I was very close to these numbers back in 2015. So essentially, I've spent 7 years fucking around my training, doing all sorts of different shit, which has been great because it's really broadened my abilities of being able to do so much. But my strength gain has then been limited because of that. So I've only just recently, squatted or deadlifted really 20 kilos more than I did in 2015. It's 2022 now. So 7 years it took me to get 20 kilos on my deadlift. And it's just but watching how I deadlift it is, again, different kettle of fish. So then when I started to think about that, and I started having clients ask me questions about, oh, how can I get as strong as you or something like that? And I'm just like, I've been at this for so long. So it's you've just started. So we're going to find your potential soon. But then it's cool, okay, then the grind starts, then the work starts. So for me, this kind of come about from those thought processes of just the comparison side of things and understanding where your abilities are.
Yeah, I think understanding's the key word there, in that people often question their results and they want to be fitter or stronger than they currently are, or maybe they're not making as much progress as quickly as they would like or expect. And they see what other people are doing and they're like, hang on a minute, they're stronger than I am, they're fitter than I am, they've got this muscle unlocked faster than I have. And I think it's important to consider the whole picture. There's so many factors that go into how you're able to perform in any physical context on a given day that we so easily ignore or dismiss or don't factor in. They just think, oh, he squats this many kilos, why don't I squat that many kilos? And there's a huge number of reasons to explain it, which is the context for this episode. So I think the first thing we need to do is discuss the obvious stuff, the physiological stuff. So what variables physiologically can affect your current ability or your rate of progress. And I think the first one is just your body. It, bodies come in all
Pretty
shapes and
much, yeah.
sizes. Yeah. And your genetics will predispose you to be better and worse at certain things. So if you're really tall, that's a big advantage for things like rowing and basketball. If you've got short levers, then it's going to help you with certain barbell lifting movements. And if you're short and light, then that's going to help you with body weight movements, gymnastics, and calisthenics. So those, depending on the sport and the movement, those can be huge factors to determine your starting point, but also your potential. Like, it's very unlikely that somebody who is significantly shorter than average is going to become an NBA basketball player. There are exceptions. There are people who aren't that tall that can play in the NBA or row. It's the same thing. Like, the sport selects for certain shapes and sizes and will dictate to a certain extent your potential in those sports or movements.
Yeah, that's what CrossFit was doing for a while, right? It's like basically around your 5'9" male, around 200 pounds. Like your Rich Fronins, your Matt Frasers was just right for like the demands of the sport, the stress that it puts on the body. They're light enough for gymnastics, but heavy enough for heavy barbells. Like it was just the right kind of factor. But then you had the outliers. You got like your Vellners, your Fakowskis and stuff like that. And then obviously not necessarily number one, but number twos and threes. How they were the outliers. They're really tall. And then you got like Josh Bridges, obviously, who's always that bit shorter and thing, which he always struggled with a lot of things. But then he was able to kind of do other things better because of his size. And it's, I think, understanding where you're best suited, I think also comes into part of it. It's like if you're trying to be a world-class rower and you're 5'6", and like 70 kilos, you've got fuck all chance really, unless you're in a weight category type thing. But if you're talking about just overall best rower, you want to have all the best opportunities of size, strength, height, all these factors that ensure you get the best out of it. So.
Exactly. And I think this is illustrated nicely with Brian Shaw. So if you haven't seen it, get onto YouTube and Google Brian Shaw wrote like erg world records.
Yeah.
And basically, Brian Shaw, for those of you who might not know who he is a strongman, and he's fucking tall and fucking heavy and fucking strong. And he basically decided to have a crack at some concept to rowing world records, generally the shorter stuff. So I think it's like max distance in a minute and fastest 100 meters. And because he is just so tall and so powerful and so strong, he destroys them because his physiological advantages for erg-based rowing just trump the best rowers in the world. Like, so even if you are a full-time rower, because he is so much taller and stronger, he can still beat you at short erg tests. And yeah, I think that's a huge one that needs to be put on the table just to to manage people's expectations.
To put it bluntly,
sometimes you're just not made for things.
Yeah, and also then your actual age. Like, if you start in a game so much later than other people that are just coming into it, say when they're kids or like even early 20s or whatever, like they've got so much more time under the whatever they're doing and in the game than you have. And like there is such thing as like old man strength, but normally old man strength comes from time in the gym that you've already accrued and that you're still old and you're still strong as fuck because you put in the time and the graft. So it's like actual age is really important. If you only started in your like early 30s with say strength training, bodybuilding, something like that, like those newbie gains that you get potentially if you start when you're like 16, 18, where your test levels are high, your growth, like you grow like anything. Like if you didn't get that and you missed that boat, then that was just unfortunate for you. You'll get those newbie gains still, but it will not be anywhere near like you would have at the younger age. And it's just part of it. It's just an unfortunate thing you didn't start earlier. So you just have to, as I say, you make your bed and you lay in it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the two ends of the spectrum, when you're super young, your body just adapts so much faster. Your body's in a growth and adaptation mode. So kids who start sports when they're younger, their bodies can adapt much quicker they're generally more supple, flexible, and able to get into positions because they haven't had years of stiffening up and adapting
Yeah.
to certain lifestyles. And at the other end of the spectrum, if you're old, then it is harder to make physiological adaptations. The rate of muscle protein synthesis diminishes. This is why things like testosterone replacement therapy are becoming more prominent as people get to the later stages of life. They recognize that their ability to tolerate and adapt to training is less. So often people need to reduce the volume and intensity of their training to actually recover from sessions as they get older. So like Rob said there, if you are starting a new pursuit at a later age, you need to have some level of acceptance that you're not going to be able to adapt to the new demands as quickly as somebody who is younger than you, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think that the age part is so prevalent in just, even if you've been training for say 10 years, you just know you have to warm up more now than you did used to. Like, and I think that is just an example of that. So then someone's starting this in their say early 30s, they haven't got that suppleness that you just mentioned about. They haven't got those, like, the body's ability to recover quickly. So they've got their lifetime bad habits potentially. They've got their stressful jobs. They've got all these other factors which are going to impair the ability for the body to adapt easily to things. And it's they're the factors that people just don't take into consideration. And it's sad because it's like they could be doing everything they can, but it's unfortunate it's a bit too late for the top end, but it doesn't mean that it's game over. And it's kind of where we're leading into this part where the physiological stuff is fair enough, but we also now start to understand about why are you progressing slower than someone else, and you have to take into consideration things like training age and experience.
Exactly. Yeah. So apart from your actual age, your training age is basically how long have you been doing something. And you can look at this a few different ways, but essentially training age, if you've been doing something for a really long time, you should be better at it, right? So in terms of explaining your current ability, if two people have been playing golf, one's been playing for 1 year, one's been playing for 20 years, it's very unlikely that the person that's been playing for 1 year is better than the person who's been playing for 20 years, all else being equal. However, this can work the other way in that if you've been doing a certain type of fitness for a really long time, for example, strength training, you could be closer to your genetic potential, as much as I don't really like that term. So it's a lot harder to add 5 kilos onto a lift when you are close to your genetic potential compared to if you just did it for the first time yesterday and you set your first 1 rep max. So that training age needs to be considered from both perspectives if you're trying to explain your current ability, but also your rate of progress, because you can't just, like, a newbie might be able to add 5 kilo onto their deadlift every month for a few months, but at some point that's going to dry up. So having the understanding as to why it's drying up, are there things that you're not doing, or is it just the fact that you are already really strong, so it's going to be harder to keep adding more and more strength?
Yeah, because as well, I think you have to appreciate when you're adding more and more strength, sometimes it is just the sheer loads that you're putting your body under. You have to appreciate that the body doesn't want to do these things. Like, even if, like, for instance, you've got 100 kilos feels the same to one person as 200 kilos feels to someone else, how 300 feels to someone else, fair enough. But it's still 300 kilos on the body compared to 200. I don't care if it's experience. Like, that's so much load going through the body. Your recovery is going to be bigger. Same thing as my argument for pull-ups. And what annoys me, when you got like a fucking 60 kilo person banging out pull-ups. So, well, you're bigger, you should have more muscle and stuff. I'm like, no, I have 100 kilos going through these hands trying to do pull-ups. It's not the same. This is because I'm shit at pull-ups. But it's like, this is my argument towards it. But because it's just more stress on the body.
Yeah, exactly. At some stage, there's just more physical work being done. So load lifted, or if it's speed of running, like if somebody's running a 15-minute 5K, the energy output and work done
Mm.
is significantly greater or more intense than somebody who's running a 20 or 25-minute 5K, just in terms of the raw work and energy requirement. It is more. So that will also impact greatly the recoverability and ability to continue progressing in that endeavor.
Yeah, and I think within the training age, it's like experience is like, obviously it kind of makes the same things, training age and experience, but like the way you break down under fatigue, I think the more
Mm.
time you've had in the chosen endeavor, and the more you've kind of been close to top end, you've been close to the top end of your capacity, that you know how to deal with that stress and how to deal with, like, if the body, so you keeping it with, say, a squat, like when I look back at my squat in 2015 and looking how I done my single at 227 compared to how I did 227 for a double a couple of weeks ago, the composure of the squat is two different squats. That first one in 2015 was a drop and hope, whereas now it's a control to the bottom, drive out, and I still look good even on the second rep. Like, it's like, yes, it's only one rep in 7 years, but the quality of that movement, and just, there is no breakdown. There is, and if there was a breakdown, it wasn't what it was like before, where the upper back rounded and all that stuff. Now it's like those sort of things have only come because through experience and how I've been essentially loading my body, I've understood what it takes to kind of the importance of holding positions and not changing technique when you get heavy, because that's a huge thing, changing technique or doing a different thing. Because when I was going through my snatching phase, I remember as soon as I get to 130 kilos, I felt that I had to do something different, because I had to game the system of getting that bar above me, rather than what I did all the way up, 120, 125. I did everything exactly the same, but 130 kilos on that bar, I was like, I'm going to tighten everything up and try and do something completely different, because I hadn't had as much experience of doing snatches at high-end fatigue. So I haven't had that
Yeah.
experience and learnings.
Exactly. I think with the training age and the experience and just accumulating more reps, the motor patterns get better baked in. So in those moments of high fatigue or heavy load, like you said there, your your body, when it's inexperienced, is unsure how to solve the problem of that movement or that task. So it's going to try and draw from anywhere possible. So in that squat, your upper back rounds, it's trying to load the upper back to just try and get some extra strength from somewhere. And it hasn't had enough repetitions to learn the most efficient way of getting the job done through multiple reps, multiple training sessions, multiple tweaks to your technique to learn and understand this is the optimal way to solve the problem. Your body remembers that subconsciously without you even necessarily having to focus on any specific cues. I know this is the way that I get the job done. And for me, this manifests really nicely in the ball sports, where athletes have their routines. What they're trying to do is tap into that subconscious by just going through the pre-shot ritual. So it might be in golf, they always address the ball in a certain way. Or my favorite actually is in tennis. If you watch any elite tennis player when they're about to serve, it's almost copy paste exactly the same every single time. The way they bounce the ball, they'll often what I call wet their feet. So they'll put both their toes into court, then out of court before they step behind the baseline. Couple of bounces. Nadal famously like adjusts his sleeve, then wipes his brow before he actually tosses the ball up to serve. And all these routines and rituals serve a purpose to just groove the same motor pattern as similarly as possible so that they can get the consistent result that they're seeking to achieve. Jonny Wilkinson, when he's kicking for goal in rugby, was another classic example where his body positions were exactly the same, the way he would visualize the ball going through the posts and looking at a certain spot. All those techniques have the same purpose of executing a skill under pressure and whatever situation. And say a young kid does Jonny Wilkinson's pre-kick routine, that doesn't mean he's going to kick as well as Jonny Wilkinson. It's only
Yeah.
through the long years and thousands of reps that has been grooved in as the motor pattern. So when you're comparing your results to somebody else's results, or you're frustrated as to why you're not getting the same outcomes as them, you've got to consider how many reps have you got in the bank compared to that person. And the efficiency of being able to do that skill to some extent can't be shortcut. You have to put in those reps to earn the right to expect the consistent high level output that these people do.
Yeah, it's that purposeful practice, right? And it's like when you're talking about routines, it's like for me, I had this the other day how I was on building up to a heavy one, and this was then at the time very close to the heaviest I'd ever done. And so I put on some music, I got a bit too hyped up. I grabbed the bar with my right hand first, then my left hand, I kind of got myself under it, tried to unrack it, and it just felt wrong because it wasn't my routine. I'd gone completely rogue and I'd fucked it up. And I was like, and I racked it back in. I was like, no, hold on, step back. I then done what I normally do. I composed myself. I walked up to the bar as I normally do. I always grab left hand, slide my hand to the right, roll the bar in the rack so my wrist buckle back, and then get myself under the bar, secure it into me so the bar becomes part of me, not me squatting with a bar on my back. And like that feeling, I will know if I'm going to squat well or not, because if the bar, when I step up, doesn't feel like it's crushing me, and I feel like I'm just suddenly part of this bar, I know that I can squat this weight because it feels part of me. And that's, again, through me being able to analyze what's going on through my routine. So I've gone through doing the same thing every single time, that then as soon as this happens, I know what it should feel like. So everything else means I execute exactly how I should, and I will then achieve what I want to, because it's all subconscious. Because I'm not thinking, grab my left, grab my right. Because when I didn't, and I overthought and I just hyped, and I did it stupidly, it didn't feel right. And my body's like, no, don't do this. So I didn't. And thankfully I didn't. And then I got the lift I needed to. But it's amazing the routines, and how I remember watching Sonny Webster say something about how whenever he went up to a snatch, he'd always do a certain thing first before he got onto the platform, because it's what he does. And then as soon as he's on the platform, he's world-based, he goes into tunnel vision, and all he sees is what he needs to do. And it's so key. But that, I feel, routines of having habit-based lifting is essential if you are trying to really reach your potential, because you want to know that you've done everything the same the whole way up, because it means that you've got nothing coming at you that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on your purposeful practice point as well, because I think that's actually an important distinction away from training age and experience. And I think the best example of this is in CrossFit, where, say, somebody has been doing CrossFit for a few years and they still haven't got double unders, muscle ups, whatever the movement that they haven't quite unlocked, or handstand push-ups. They haven't unlocked that movement yet. And then somebody else turns up, starts doing CrossFit, and within a year, they've done the whole spectrum. They can do everything in the CrossFit arsenal. And person A is like, what the fuck's going on there? Why are they able to do it and I'm not? And the purposeful practice is the key point there. If you're just turning up to classes and doing whatever is asked of you in the class, scaling appropriately, without putting a concerted effort into practicing the missing skills, you will not level up in those skills as quickly as the person who is doing that. So you see this time and time again, but one of my clients didn't have handstand walks and would always skip the handstand walk sessions until the open was around the corner, and they had, I think, maybe 6 weeks. And in 6 weeks, after years and years of CrossFit, being unable to do handstand walks, in 6 weeks, practicing a little bit of handstand walk every day, they were able to handstand walk because they put in the purposeful practice. So if you're frustrated with your current level of ability, you've got to ask yourself the question, am I actually going after that skill like I really want it? or am I kind of expecting it to happen by osmosis because I'm in the environment? I've done CrossFit for 5 years, turned up to class 3 times a week. Why? Like, I deserve handstand walks. That's not how it works. You have to put in the time, effort, and focus to get the results that you're seeking, if that's something you're frustrated with.
This is kind of a little detour on this, like, why am I progressing slower than my mate?
Uh-oh.
But like, no, it just, because this doesn't then criticize group coaching, because I love it. But this is the problem with group coaching, because it's then you're doing CrossFit expecting to have handstand walks, right? So if you're someone that just goes to classes and handstand walks comes up once a month, right? You have 12 opportunities to learn how to handstand walk compared to someone that can go to open gym. So I'm now thinking, I'm using myself as an example, and say a member that goes to the classes. We do basically exactly the same thing. However, I spend a bit more time mobilizing my positions that I need to get into, get myself prepped for that. I spend more time on the skill because I have more time. My time isn't based in an hour, it's maybe based in 2. So I can give myself double the amount of time of handstand specific work because I have that time. But when you're in a group classing model of an hour, you can only expect a certain amount, which is then where the benefits of like individualized coaching or like training yourself. But for most people that work a 9-to-5 job or something like that, that can't have that freedom of 2 hours to essentially do what you want, it's just an unfortunate thing. You have to understand that unless you actively want to, as you mentioned there, with the purposeful practice, to spend the time trying to achieve X, Y, and Z, it's not just going to come to you. And I really like the way you just put it there. It's like, you don't just, because you've been training for 5 years, you now unlocked handstand walks. It's not like that. It's no. You practice handstand walks and you get handstand walks. But there is some prerequisites which you maybe can accrue from the group classes, like handstand push-ups, handstand holds, all this upper body strength stuff. These things will indicate you have the potential to stabilize your body when you're trying to then walk upside down. But it doesn't. Then mean you can walk upside down without learning the skill of walking on your hands, because that's a very different kettle of fish.
Exactly. And I think that leads nicely into the next point, which is the quality of coaching. So in a group coaching environment, if the programming is good and the selection of regressions and progressions is good, you can 100% make great progress towards all of these skills. And loads of people do unlock these movements just by turning up to class repeatedly. It's just whether it's the most direct path to unlocking those skills is the question. But with great quality coaching, the feedback and skill refining loop just becomes much tighter, because rather than trying to learn through just an iterative failure and improvement process, the coach will be able to see and identify things that you can't, and with their experience be able to give you training interventions which will help you progress much faster. So depending on your level of interaction and the quality of your coaching can also be a huge can be a game changer for the level you're at, and also the speed of progression, because you're not adding in those delays, like even just from a time basis, right? If you're training by yourself, you do a lift and you review your own footage. If the coach has watched you do that lift, you get the feedback instantaneously, versus having to watch the 20, 30, 40, 60 seconds of videos for your set before then drawing a conclusion. So I think that's a huge one. And it's why you see the standards of pretty much all sports just continue to go up, is because the sporting community is constantly learning from each other. So you see generations of athletes just lifting the bar further and further and further because they get the benefit of learning from coaches that have worked across generations and can spot the trends to say, I worked with this guy before, this was his issue, this is how we fixed it, rather than having to spend weeks or months trying to figure out the solution. They've got that tool ready to pull out in the same situation in future. So if you do want to go faster, then having an experienced and competent coach is one of the best things you can do.
Yeah, and so then again, going back to that the group coaching example which I mentioned about there, the the time-based thing is, I think, the really key part, because if you only have, say, 10 minutes or 15 minutes to get understanding of how to do a skill, you want to make sure that coach is able to get across exactly what you need in that 10 to 15 minutes, rather than kind of keeping you at a level that Karen next to you is. Do you know what I mean? So it's like you're trying to find, okay, this is why I love group coaching, because for me, it's being able to analyze the room and see, cool, this is where everyone's at, and what can I give this one person here to take them to their next step compared to the person next to them, compared to the person next to them. And it's like, it's the thinking on your toes of all the experience that you've had in other areas, of being able to say, right, this is what's going to take them to that next level. And I think the progression side of things is like looking at then the access to coaching that you may have. If, like you said there, if you're just doing the same things all the time and not really moving, because you're looking at your videos and thinking, yeah, that looked good, because you just don't have an understanding, then you're not going to progress as fast as you can. Because, you know, your mate might be in a class with a great coach, and then compared to you who's in a class of like an okay coach, and like you're doing the same things, you're doing the same program, but you're just being told two different things. The coach is meeting you where you're at, rather than just meeting you where the room's at.
Yeah, exactly. So I think to categorize all these ones after physiological factors, we can think of them as like time-based factors. And I think there's a harsh reality that some people need to come to terms with, which is that if somebody has a big head start on you, sometimes it is just impossible to catch up. If somebody has a long history of training and practicing a certain skill, they've been doing it for a really long time, they've had access to amazing coaching, sometimes, and you're coming to the game late, it is just going to be impossible for you to catch up. There are some things that, make it impossible. However, I think the more productive mindset I would like listeners to come away with is there are still a huge number of factors that you can control. So nobody in their training journey is 100% optimal. There's always edges and inches you can gain here and there. But if you're unhappy with where you're currently at or the speed at which you're progressing, you need to have an honest look at how much you're committing towards the goals that you say you have. Are there sacrifices you could be making to improve your training progress? And are they worth it? If they're worth it, then you should be doing it. So things that you can control, like your commitment to your training, how seriously you're taking it, your recovery as well is a massive one. I think that's probably the most common area for easy wins. You can just be a little bit more disciplined on your nutrition, your hydration, your sleep and rest, essentially, when your body's adapting. They don't take, it's not like straining away in the gym and really pushing yourself. I think most people who like training find that actually quite straightforward. They don't struggle to dig in a session if it's asked of them.
Yeah.
But what they do struggle with is the consistent discipline to make the small wins outside of the gym. So maybe that's an area that you could be recovering better so that you're in a better shape next time you come to train. What else could people generally be better at? Just while you're coughing, perfect time to ask a question.
So, for me, it's like, I think the commitment side of things is where you can control how much you're committed, but sometimes even if you are fully committed, it's just as we've mentioned there, sometimes it's just not enough, because either the person you're comparing yourself to has just had that much more time. And this is then where the saying of comparison is a thief of joy, because it's like, as I alluded to right at the very start of this episode, like, that's the problem now. We're not comparing ourselves to where we was yesterday. It's great to look at others and say, I want to be like that. I want to be better. I want to strive for more. It's great to take inspiration from that sort of stuff. But to then start judging your progress based on someone else's progress, unless you're the same individual, which even in that case, like, there's still going to be other factors, but like, it's just, you can't judge how well you're doing based off someone else's, how well they're doing. And for me, I think if you manage your expectations correctly, don't get me wrong, still shoot for the stars. Like they say, shoot for the stars, you'll end up at the moon. So like you'll still get there, but like understand that when you're putting weight on a bar, 2.5 kilos and 5 kilos on a bar is a big difference, and understanding what these feel to you like is key. Like, so I'm just again going back to like the squat and the bench press, say like, because I've been in the game for as long as I have, and understanding what, say, 2.5 kilos added onto a bar feels like, I understand the type of stress that's going to take and the extra work I'm going to need to do to get it. So I've understood that. So when it comes to progressing, having an expectation of how much I can expect to progress on my certain lift, I have a much deeper appreciation for.
Yeah, I like that. I think to reframe that, the way I see it is it's
You said too much. This had to properly say it.
Not at all. I'm trying to.
What do you mean not at all? This is exactly what you're right. Go ahead, mate. Make it easier for the listeners to digest.
So in the context of controllables, something you can control is managing your own expectations. So I think what my interpretation of what you said there is, you can control the way that you view your training and your progress, in that you can view it through the lens of, I am nudging forwards compared to where I was yesterday, last week, last month, last year, versus I'm viewing my training through the lens of, this is where I sit in the pecking order in my gym when I'm comparing myself to people who used to be professional athletes or take drugs or are genetically gifted or have had 20 years of high class coaching, all these different things, which I think people might look at, they squat more than me, without considering that bigger picture of all those different factors that play into the actual result or speed of progression. And I think it's an important way to view your own training, because I've worked with a lot of people over the years who everything's going up, like everything across the board is getting better. We're making great progress towards their goals. And they're still just a little bit like, yeah, but I still want to lift more. It's like, well, you will lift more. Like, this is all trending positively. So just keep doing what you're doing and it's going to happen. And they're almost frustrated that they're not way ahead of where they are already. And I think that comes from that comparison where they think, I kind of view this person as relatively similar to me, but they haven't considered all these other variables which play into what determines your actual real world results.
Summarize that nicely, mate. But and for me as well, I think the worst part is then when you're comparing yourself to someone that isn't the same as you. That I think is worse, because but then like you're comparing yourself to either someone 10 years younger or fucking been in the game for 10 years more than you. It's like you're not comparing apples with apples. You're like, you should be then using that person's inspiration, not as a fuck, why I ain't as good as him, I'm annoyed, or I'm not as good as her. Like, going back to kind of the point where we mentioned earlier about the quality of coaching and like standing on the shoulders of giants, where you mentioned to me about how Kobe said that he learned from Jordan, and if Jordan was never as good as he was, Kobe would never have been as good as he was. And same as LeBron. It's like you like, if I'm trying to coach someone to get stronger, I can now let them bypass all the shit that I've done wrong over the years and say, this is the better way. Doesn't mean you're going to get stronger than me, but you now can bypass all the shit that I did wrong because I've learned from those mistakes where I wasted time doing things. But on the flip side to that, it's not always wasted time, because even if I didn't get, say, a new 1 rep max, I've still got more reps in the bank. I've still got more time. I still learnt the skill better. So progress isn't always straight weight on the bar. Sometimes it is just being able to execute better under stress. And there's no weight on the bar then. It's just you doing it better. So yeah, it's fascinating. I do love this area of thought, because it a lot of the time it does go beyond just the physiological stuff. Like there is, like when we discussed here, obviously that's what this whole episode's been about. But it's like, that's what I love about it, how unless you appreciate all those variables that are beyond just the physical things that you see, it then really makes you appreciate the amount of time when you look at other people hitting PBs and hitting lifts, and you're just like, fuck, the amount of work they're putting to get that. Like, fair play. Like, I can't even
Yeah.
fathom that. It's like when I see people lifting like 350 kilos on their deadlift, I'm just like, fuck, like I can't imagine putting in that much work to do that. That's so much time and just it's cool.
Yeah. I think you made a great point then, the sort of coaching point. And that's when you think about it in really simplistic terms, the product of coaching or mentoring, you're paying for a shortcut to benefit from their experience. So they have learned either, through like dedicated learning or through experience, they have acquired knowledge and experience which will help you take a more direct path from A to B. They can guide you to take the most direct path from A to B, but you still have to go down that path. They can't go from A to B
Yeah.
for you, but they can point you in the right direction. So that's why that sort of ties it all together, in that the experience and the time and the reps and the hard work has to be done. That's a prerequisite for you to get from A to B. But do you want it to be a direct line, or do you want it to be a squiggly line where you take a lot of detours? And sometimes the detours are fun. Sometimes the detours give you unintended benefits. But if in the context of this episode, you're wondering why your results aren't where they want to be, or they're not progressing as quickly as you want them to, then that's when we start looking at all these different factors.
Yeah, and I think even with the analogy there, the squiggly line and the straight line, is in understand you're still going to have squiggles on your straight line, because like your journey is still going to have hiccups, and it's like that's fun. Like from injuries and from just like not from failed lifts and stuff like that, you get to see where holes are in your game. Like I got to see in my last powerlifting competition that I still had this like thought in the back of my head of I thought I was still protecting my back. So my last deadlift, I said at the start, before the meet, I remember saying in the episode before the meet and at the meet, I'm going to fucking deadlift and I'm not worried about no injury or anything. Pick the bar up to my knees and I said to you before, I'm so pissed off with myself that I dropped that bar, that 280 kilo bar, because it was moving. It was at my knees. I just had no balls to grind it out. But that failed lift taught me that I still wasn't mentally there. So then in this whole prep for this competition that I've gone through now, in the back of my mind the whole time, I've been just focusing on the quality of that movement and negating any thought of injury, and and don't get me wrong, it will still be there. But because I think the naiveness of not being injured is a blessing in disguise, because you do some stupid shit. But when you have been injured and you're like, oh, I know what can happen from this. Sometimes that can hold on you, and we'll see. We'll see in this competition if I can fucking get rid of those cobwebs and fucking do some shit. But I love the detours that do come about from your journeys, because there are opportunities for growth. And I think if you see them as that, like, why didn't this lift go as well as it could, or why did this go really well? What did we do? What did we do to achieve that? Then you can start to really break it down and say, okay, this is how I can get better. And then understand then maybe why your mate is progressing faster, because maybe they just got a bit more of a direct path and they're currently in the exact path they need to be compared to you, but you're still trying to find your feet. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. I think learning from your mistakes and how quickly you learn from your mistakes is basically, everyone's going to make mistakes or deviate from the ideal path, but it's how quickly you course correct. And I think that's a huge factor for what dictates your progress, because you could be hammering, like say your body doesn't respond to a certain strength program just because of the way your body works. You could follow that program for 12 weeks and make negligible progress, or you could speak to a coach who knows why you might not be adapting to that program, and he could change your program after 2. So you've course corrected 10 weeks earlier, so your progression can benefit much sooner. And I think that iteration process and the speed of it is a huge determiner of overall results and speed of those results.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's something where for me, when I've looked at, have had to review like clients like strength progress on like say preps that they've done, and I said, right, okay, why did you achieve X or why didn't you achieve that? and then comparing it, say, with past experiences, and say, cool, actually, you really responded well to this. Okay, cool. Now let's put this one into plan for the next one, because sometimes you're just not going to get better. Sometimes it's just, it is what it is, but you've maybe got better in another area of your training compared to that area. So yeah, awesome, mate. Loved it today. So we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And we cannot wait to get some feedback from you guys. So if you want to leave that over on Apple Podcasts, you can do that easily. You can go over to Spotify, give us a couple of 5-star reviews there. Don't know if you can do it multiple times, or you can head over to YouTube and subscribe. We would love that. We'd appreciate it a lot. But as always, really appreciate you every single week. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers, guys.